Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Bradley Hall Show. My guest today is Chaimaa. Is it Cheref?
Yeah, you got it.
Good,
Sure.
good. Chaimaa is a first generation Algerian American immigrant and childhood complex trauma survivor. She has a BA in psychology with training in clinical research and a background working one on one with marginalized children experiencing severe trauma. We certainly need more of those. Chaimaa and I met while she was studying at the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaches, where I am the director of accreditation. She was earning her certification as a trauma recovery coach. I invited her here this evening to have her share her story about growing up torn between two cultures and share her story about what she's discovered about her family's culture and heritage and how that has changed her life. And there's a note here that you want to continue your education in art therapy for trauma for survivors. Hopefully we get into that later. But for now, Chaimaa, thank you for joining me. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone joining us. I'm really excited to share my story. I did mention earlier that I was feeling a little low today. It's been an emotional day, but I'm still going to try to give you guys the best experience. So thank you for showing up.
Yeah.
Should we just jump right into like kind of the presentation and like just flow through it?
Well, yeah, let's do that. Do that. And then I'll come in after that and we'll talk about it a little bit because there's a lot of your story that's probably not in here that piqued my interest when we had a chance to talk.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I could just highlight essentially parts of my story. And if you want to jump in and just ask questions, that'd be great. So yeah, I actually was born in Sieg, Algeria, which is northwest of Algeria in North Africa. I came here when I was 6 months old with my family. So my mother, my father, and my two older sisters. At the time, my mom was pregnant with my younger sister, who's joining us, but she's off to the side, just listening and taking notes. Yeah, and so that's kind of where my story starts in terms of this disruption of cultures, is that I think, my parents never expected to come to America. They came when they were in their 30s, like late 30s, almost 40s. And obviously, my two older sisters had spent some of their childhood in Algeria and learning Algerian and the culture and everything like that. Whereas me and my younger sister didn't have that canvas once we moved here. So the disruption in our family between the two cultures was more apparent, I would say, between my younger sister and I.
Okay, so if I may, when your parents moved here, they were in their 30s. Is that, to recap, is that what you said?
Yeah, like 30s.
Okay. Okay, and your siblings were how old? The older ones?
So my oldest sister is 8 years older than me, and then the following one is 4 years older than me. So I was about 6 months, so they were about 8, 9.
Okay.
5, 6.
And then your younger sister was born here. Is that correct?
Yeah, she was born here. So we came here in July. She was born in December of 1989.
Okay. Okay. And that's an integral part of this story. And for those listening, this is going to be the basis of the whole story. Basically, the household was split. You two of you were essentially Americans.
Yeah.
And your older sisters had a lot of influence from Algeria, but were also growing up. So they were kind of immigrants growing up in America. Your parents were actually immigrants, and you were essentially just Americans. So there was a split in the household, so to speak, on your ideology and how you view things. That
Absolutely.
pretty good summation. Okay.
Yeah. There's another thing I did want to mention because I think it ties a huge part of it in, which I'm finding out now, is that like the languages as well was divided. So my parents would speak Algerian with my two older sisters, but because or at least I can speak for myself, I struggled a lot in my first 4 or 5 years because we would go back to Algeria for the summer for like 3 months, then come back. And then so I think with the trauma of being, between these places, I would learn Algerian completely and forget English there. Like they would try to speak to me and I didn't remember a word. And vice versa would happen when I'd come here back to America. It was hard for me to like acclimate again. And so I remember having like time, maybe in like third grade, I had a teacher who would come and help me like learn phonetically. So there was that aspect as well of not having parents who spoke proper English, and then not, for me at least, really struggling between the two languages at an early stage. So I noticed that my parents actively spoke to my younger sister and I in English, in broken English, but that was something that I picked up on as well.
Okay. How did that feel at that age? I mean, how did people treat you when you went back to Algeria? Let's start there.
So yeah, we went back. The first time I remember them being really welcoming to me and my younger sister. And I found it difficult more so the second time we went back for like the full summer, because I was more conscious. I was about 8, 8 or 9. My sister was like 7. She's like a year younger than me. She doesn't remember that much, but for me, I remember the first time it being like my extended family was very welcoming, very much like, oh my God, this is our like nieces and nephews, and the American ones, right? They would call us Americanía, which is basically just like the Americanized, or so that didn't really affect me as much the first time I remember, but the second time I do remember feeling this disconnect from my family, and not being able to, like, I feel like when we went back the second time, like everyone just had a blast. Like everyone was just like, they adapted so well. Even my younger sister was having a blast, and I found it really difficult. And I think it was because of that language barrier that I couldn't overcome. So yeah, that was like the first isolation I felt from my two cultures.
Okay. And did you go back every year after that?
No. So that's when shit hit the fan, to say the least, with my family, because of like the 2008 like housing crisis and everything.
Yeah. Understood. Definitely understood. For those of us who are a little older, I'm on this, the side your parents were on, and it was 2008 was a brutal time for sure.
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay. So, and you felt the same thing when you came back here, right? That, I mean, you felt here you were Algerian, and when you're in Algeria, you felt American. Is that how this was working?
Yeah. So I didn't really notice when I was younger how much I was Algerian compared to, anything else, because I don't know if you guys can see, but that photo I put up there on the left side is Bay Ridge.
We'll put it back up here real quick.
So yeah, that on the left is Bay Ridge. That on the right is the Cheref River in Algeria.
Okay.
But I thought that it had similarities to my last name, but we'll get to that later. So yeah, Bay Ridge is a very much, it's like on the cusp of Brooklyn, right next to Staten Island. So that bridge right there, the Verrazano, that connects Staten Island to Brooklyn. So this was like a very secluded area, but because it wasn't very expensive either, there was a huge or a big immigrant population, a big Arab population, even Algerians. One of my mom's best friend lived a block away from us, her and her family. So I never felt like I was Algerian. I just felt like almost Arab or other or immigrant in that sense until I got older. And then those specificities of culture started to come into my mind.
Sure. So, and I guess, so the point was, and this is what I gathered from your story, is that you just felt different all the way around. That you just felt like you didn't fit in anywhere. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That had to be tough. And that as a teenager, I'm sure that probably got even worse.
It did get worse, and then it didn't, because it got worse in some aspects, and then other ways it got better for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You want to move on to your next slide?
Huh?
You want to move on to the next slide?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So yeah, this is okay. So to your point, when I start to just get older, I always, I think from a young age, being so isolated from and feeling secluded from the norm, because I couldn't see myself on television. I couldn't see myself across just all kinds of media, even like music and stuff like that. So I grew conscious of that being other in terms of just physically looking different. Because Bay Ridge has a big immigrant population, but it also has a huge conservative white population, like Irish, Norwegian, that type of people. And they're very secluded, I would say. Like Bay Ridge is very much, you could tell where the cheaper places are and you could tell the expensive places. So in terms of that, I felt that I guess the economic differences as well from our races. So that's when I started picking up on, going to a school with predominantly white people, an elementary school is predominantly white, and seeing all the people in AP classes or honors are all white. There was no person that looked like me. There was no person who
Sure.
resembled me.
And this was in, I'm sorry, was in New York City?
Yeah, New York City, right? Bay Ridge. So that's why I wanted to highlight, because Bay Ridge is different in the sense that it has that part where you can see it's beautiful by the pier. I think Bon Jovi owns like $1 million houses over there, and so it's very beautiful in that sense. But the further you go up, you could see that the population changes as well as like the amount of space.
Okay, and so you chose to go to a more diverse school system, right?
No, these were zone schools for me. So that's what I want to get into, was like zip codes. But essentially that's when I started noticing it. And so when I got older and started, like for example, I, graduated high school early at 16. I was just ready to get out of my house and just, that's what I was saying. In a sense, I was feeling isolated, but in another way, I was feeling motivated to just go out there and live my life. But at the same time, I was met with the reality of my situation. And this is kind of where it taps into when I started feeling extra abandoned by the system and whitewashed. So this is what is essentially happening right now. And so the US Census continues to whitewash North African and Middle Eastern ancestry by claiming that we are, or by the US Census considering us as Caucasian and making us fill out applications as Caucasians. You'll see over there, white, for example, Lebanese, Egyptian. And, my whole life, I battled that thing of being not white. So when I'm to now put an identity that does not match what I'm feeling on the inside, this is really when shit starts to hit the fan with me.
Yeah, and understandable. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot of people who listen who can relate for various reasons. And we have a lot of we have a lot of podcast listeners and we have radio listeners. So I want to explain a little bit about the slide that we're looking at. We're looking at the slide here that highlights the North African countries as well as most of the countries in the Saudi Arabian peninsula, and there's also, you have a cutout here of an application where they've asked you your race, and you have to choose to be white, and then under the subtitles are Lebanese, Egyptian, that falls into this Middle East, North African countries, and that's what you're explaining here, is that you don't have you're not white, you don't feel white. You may not necessarily feel black. I don't mean to put words into your mouth. I don't know that that's the case. But it seems like that what you're saying is that you just didn't find the peg where someone expected you to fit. Mm-hmm. It didn't exist, right?
Exactly. And it was also, just looking at where Algeria is, it is in Africa. So to have this is where the whitewashing really started to specifically leave like a nasty taste in my mouth, because it's a part of, I think, the bigger picture of white supremacy and what it actually is, the narrative that it's trying to control essentially and trying to portray. And so seeing that I'm considered white and not black or African, the African part, I didn't mind black. I don't, wouldn't consider myself black prior to doing my research and everything, but right at that moment, seeing that I wasn't African was also very isolating, because I remember going back to Algeria and feeling like I was in Africa and feeling this very like maternal connection to it. So that was,
Yeah.
you know,
And I agree with you. The first thing is I don't understand why this question exists at all. I I someone posed that to me about 8 years ago, and we got into a great discussion of why we even ask for our race on anything. It doesn't, unless it's a medical questionnaire with your physician, and there are genetic reasons why, which now we have DNA tests for that. So I don't know. This is an outdated question,
yeah.
and it's a carryover from a system that it was designed to take away rights of people who didn't answer the question correctly. And it's a holdover from that system, and it needs to be done away with. That's my educated opinion on the whole thing. So I agree with you 100% as far as that's concerned. And I don't have the problem with this that you have on an emotional level. I just wanted you to know that I agree with you.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it feels good to hear it back, because it does feel like, unless I am talking to someone from North Africa or someone who has had similar experiences to me as a first generation immigrant, it is difficult to portray or to like express the way that I feel in terms of not even being acknowledged, like in the eyes of a system that is trying to like, you know what I mean? To try to break our culture and our heritage apart in terms of this is what you are, this is what you are. I felt like everybody knew what they were, either Hispanic or Latino, you know,
Yeah.
white, Black, African. And then I felt like, where am I? Because I'm definitely not white. I'm definitely not
Yeah.
white.
And
And
I think, and I would love someone, if they have information on this, to either back me up or correct me. I'd like to speak the truth, so I don't mind being corrected. I think this is unique to very few Western countries. I don't think this is a worldwide phenomena where you're asked what your race is.
yeah,
I think this is uniquely American. And the reason for this is, if we can have, I mean, you want to have a hard conversation? Are we doing that tonight?
I'm down for it. I'm ready for it. Yeah.
This comes down to when the slaves were freed and they didn't have certain rights if you were Black. And if you had any type of Black heritage, you were considered Black and had to answer Black. And that's the entire reason this was put in place in this country in the first place. So when I was being cryptic and said this is a holdover from that era, we certainly don't want to get into how long ago the era was, because that is a very very delicate conversation is the word I'll use, delicate. It doesn't matter how long ago it was, it's still a holdover. And that's why I said I don't understand why we're still asking this question.
Absolutely.
So
I have two things to say to that. The first, I'll say this book, One Drop by Yaba Blay, this is the book that helped me sort of not wrestle with, but come to terms with my identity as someone who now considers himself Black and considers himself African in totality. So this book, she starts it off with all these beautiful, you know, this is a book of photographs, but one of the things I loved in the beginning and why it's called One Drop was sort of what you were referring to, when the Black people were freed. I don't know if you can see that clearly, but yeah, this is exactly what it was called the one drop rule. And
okay.
So yeah, I'll read the bottom over here. Black by law, one drop or 132 Negro blood, racial genealogy. So even if you have one of 32 drop, of Negro blood, so you could see that person over there, you would be considered Black.
Right.
According to the government.
Yeah, and that was initiated after Bacon's Rebellion. So when before Bacon's Rebellion in Jamestown, Virginia, most of your slaves were poor white people that had been brought over. They were dirt poor Irish, or they were prisoners brought over from Europe. The whole indentured servant thing, they were pretty much mistreated. They enslaved a lot of Native Americans, and there were a few Africans. And there was a political dispute with Nathaniel Bacon, and he caused a riot. He incited the slaves to riot. They burned down some buildings, and they killed some white people. And we're talking back in the 1600s, and that was like not a thing that they allowed to happen. That sat with them very well. So they had to decide what they were going to do about it. And so what they did is they instituted a new law that for the first time, poor white people could own land. Before then, you had the landowners, and then you had the poor people who were working the land, and then you had the people in the middle that were the overseers of what was going on. And they instituted a law that now granted poor white people could eventually work their way up and own land. And anyone who was a white slave who their owner died, they were automatically freed. Mm-hmm. Any slave of color could not own land, and they were now inheritable property. And so what they did is they prevented riots, because any white slave, if any slave of color started talking about that they wanted to start a riot or they were going to revolt, the white slave would become a snitch, because they now their future, they're going to break out of here. They're going to own land. Their future is in jeopardy. So the extreme wealthy bought their loyalty and turned them against the other people who came from the same economic system that level that they were in, and they then turned on them. And then that was the creation of chattel slavery. So then white landowners stopped investing in non-white slaves because they could be freed. Mm-hmm. And so they started investing in slaves of color, because they were inheritable property, and they could hand their that property and their children, their offspring, down to their families. And that obviously they would breed and they would grow, and it was a financial investment. And that was the start of racism in this country. A lot of people don't know this story. This is an absolute 100% verifiable fact, and that's why we're talking about One Drop, the book that you're talking about, One Drop, because if you had black genes, you were property. If you were half white, you were still black on your birth certificate, because you were still property. It all came down to economic reasons.
Yeah. So I don't know if you could see here, but that's exactly what you're explaining. This is Black mother, her son, and her daughter. But I don't know if you could see, she's very fair. She's white. Yes. Compared to that. But she's still enslaved. And same here with this. Yeah.
So it's outdated, right?
Of course, yeah.
It needs to go away.
I will be devil's advocate, because I just learned this recently.
Okay.
And this kind of ties into what we're discussing as well with the history of North Africa.
Lay it on me.
So basically, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with the history of Algeria or North Africa in specific, but Algeria was colonized by France in the 1800s. And 1873, I think, something around there, and we didn't get our independence until the revolution in 1962. My father was born in 1961, to give you some perspective.
Okay.
So yeah. So with that, there is, I know you were saying that other Western countries don't have this race thing and all of that to fill in, and while I get it, I was reading an article about the situation in France because of this contentious relationship with Algeria and France. Algerians are treated very, very poorly. And so what they have there, though, is that because there is no tracking of race or of identities there, there is no tracking of what's happening to our people, what's actually happening in terms of, let's say, police violence or, other situations in terms of the economy.
Okay.
And that is where I see kind of like this ability to continue hurting us with a cloak of invisibility.
Okay.
Because there's nobody keeping track. How can you say that we did anything? And with that, there is still the contentious history with France is that they still are, when they talk about the Algerian war or the revolution, they continuously downplay how much or how many people were displaced, murdered, tortured, everything like that. And so it is way up in the millions. The total count is still not like there's no exact total count from all that because it left the country in a very much broken place. And France was aggressive in terms of leaving, especially Algeria, because it did colonize Morocco and other parts of Africa.
Yeah.
But they were particularly aggressive with Algerian people. Yeah. So with that, I have struggles with like doing away with the whole race thing because we still live in this system. And I think that if we like under the Obama administration, I know that they were making headways to actually including MENA, which is, it would just be Middle Eastern, North African. But under the Trump administration, they threw that out the window. So it's like we're still, you know what I mean? Like we're trying to get there, but it's just like we're not there yet. And this is still an issue. We're still not recognized across the board. So when you look at a place like Bay Ridge, which is very much white, but also mixed with a lot of Arab communities all across the board, Yemeni, Lebanese, Syrian, Algerian, Moroccan, you suddenly now have a whole group of people filling out white in the US Census. And this is how money and other, you know, things are distributed within the community. And that's false because these people are not white. Their experience is not white at all. And so this is something that's also been a drive of mine to get our identity recognized because our history is very important. And not having it was really difficult for me to form just a whole identity.
So that's fascinating that you bring up. That's a great point that you bring up about that you know, that France in particular doesn't ask for an ethnic identity, and how that seems to help cover up or swallow up an entire race. My concern is I've done a lot of genealogical work because of my circumstance, my NPE circumstance, and the thing that I've noticed a lot is that people claim a family heritage, particularly a lot of times based on their last name. So I will use Irish for a very good example because we actually have this in my family. My wife's family, they all think they're Irish. Well, unfortunately, on her DNA test, she's 1% Irish. So I think we can pretty much scratch that one off the list. Now, so it gets in, she's 34% Scottish. Well, some of the Scottish migrated to Ireland and migrated to the United States in history. So it starts to get into a question. My question is with DNA is that we have a lot of people claim heritage, and let's use your example. And I don't want to. I'm not doing this to break your example down, but I want to use you as an example. Okay. But I mean, let's say your parents are Algerian, but how do you know? And you may know, and we can do this through genealogical research and different type of things. But a lot of times your parents are Algerian, you're like, we're Algerian, but you may have grandparents that were Nigerian and grandparents that were Greek and grandparents that were Saudi Arabian, and somehow they settled in Algeria. And then 1 or 2 generations later, you were having a discussion about being Algerian, which obviously happens here in the United States. That's what this entire country is developed from. So the conversation gets a little convoluted when breaking down. And I guess I was going to ask you a question, but I think I can probably answer it. I guess it really comes down to preferred identity, right? It comes down to how you identify.
Yeah.
I was going to be ridiculous. Sometimes the best way to make a point is to be ridiculous about it. You know, are we going to have an application where you have 265 categories to choose from?
Right. Yeah.
You know, and please understand, I am in no way, shape, or form trying to nullify your point and how you feel about things. That's why I had you here, because I loved your story. I love how you articulate it and what you've gone through. I think there's so many people that are going to identify with it. It's just, nothing's easy, is it? There's never an easy answer.
Right.
So, okay. All right. Your show. What do you got next?
Yeah, we can continue on. So this is where this is a quote by Ben Khaldun, who's credited as the father of sociology. He was around in the 1300s. So this quote was about my people, specifically from the Maghrib. And when we say Maghrib, it means, in Arabic, it means west of. So this is when narrative comes into the play a lot in our stories specifically, because the way we've been called from Berber to Maghrib to, we have so many names over history that we've been called. Moors, that's the word I was thinking of, the Moors. And a lot of it has been retained in history from a perspective that's not ours. So Maghrib being the Arabs who conquered North Africa, which is a big reason why the North Africans speak Arabic, mixed in with Temazigh, which is actually, I don't know if you guys know what Berbers are, but they're the indigenous people of this region. And so we have Arabic mixed in with Berber, but that actually means barbaric in like Greek. And so this is another thing where we have, because even the name that the indigenous name that we're called that's supposed to be respectful is offensive. And so that language is Temazigh, which is what in another slide, you'll see, we have a whole alphabet and there's been recordings of those tablets back in like 10,000 BC. So this is a very ancient language. And so, so the father of sociology, this is him commenting on this group of people, the Maghrib. They belong to a powerful, formidable, brave, and numerous people, a true people like so many others the world has seen, like the Arabs, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. The men who belong to this family of people have inhabited the Maghrib since the beginning. And if you look at that photo down there, I'll just explain it. It's essentially like, I would say it's sand or rocks, but it's a monument of the Numidian kingdom, which existed, ancient times. So again, with like the Greeks, the Persians, the Romans, a little further than that. Even I saw some studies that said that the sandstone that's found in this location in Algeria is dated back a couple of thousand years before the pyramids in ancient Greek or ancient Egypt. So there's, to give you a little perspective in terms of timeline, this monument was where they buried their kings, their queens, because they did have a lot of queens as well. And they practiced a lot of ceremonies that you can kind of still see in the area today. So when I found out about this, I was very excited to dive into this history of my people. And also it felt almost like, as I was reading it, like so true to like the family that I know, back in Algeria, the things I've seen and just how I felt being there, it felt like that was a reality, like that was true. And it felt sort of like parts of me were connecting once I started understanding that there's a rich history in North Africa.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Should we go into the next slide?
Sure.
So this is kind of where I was telling you about the research I was looking at. So recently, the oldest known evidence for anatomically modern humans as of 2017 are fossils found at Jebel, which means mountain, Irhoun in Morocco, dated about 300,000 years ago. So this put archaeologists in a really big, or in a tough position in terms of reimagining the tree. I don't know if you could see that over there. That's what our last common ancestors, I put a little graph over there. They're starting to have to reconsider that we didn't just come from East Africa around 200,000 years ago, that the modern human probably came from a Pan-African form, meaning that these types of these other species, Homo sapiens, have come together, and over time we became the modern human. So this was really shocking to me to know that 300,000 years ago we can find our ancestors. I was just blown away. And then to find out also just, so the Maghreb region in northwestern Africa is believed to have been inhabited by Berbers, which the true name is actually Immigrant, which I'll get into a little later, but by Berbers from at least 10,000 BC. Prehistoric Tifne, which is what I was describing earlier, scripts were found in the Wahdan region, which is like, my family lives there. Part of my family lives in Wahdan, so very exciting to find that out. But yeah, during the pre-Roman era, several successive independent states. So we have, I can't even pronounce that, the Masail existed before King Messina unified the people of Numidia. So there's the Numidia kingdom and Nubian kingdom. So those are two separate. And I think that, yeah, those are often confused, but they both existed separately, but around the same time. So Numidia was a very much the formidable kingdom at the time. So yeah, you could see that that's what the alphabet looks like. It also has very much like a similar look to ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. And then there is a sign. I don't know if you guys can see that, but on the next slide, we can go and find it. Oh, it's probably the next one. But this one, yeah, I just want to give you guys a little perspective of what it looks like in terms of the geography. So Sieg Muscat is where I was born, where I'm from, but it obviously has a rich history because it was formerly Saint Denis du Sieg. So there was a lot of Spanish influence as well as Greek influence, because the Carthage was in Libya, but very much all connected. So yeah, this gives you kind of a little bit of a background in terms of where like the most concentration of activity was happening in the ancient times. And yeah, this is
for those who are listening on the podcast or on the WUBI radio, I'm going to put this PowerPoint up on my website so they can come and check these out. Some of these are fascinating. My website is www.thebradleyhall.com. You'll want to look for the podcast, click on the podcast, and or actually the blog. Look for my blog, click on my blog. I'll put a blog post up with a recap of this conversation and this PowerPoint so people can check that out who can't see it now.
Yeah, so I'll just finish this up by saying, in doing my research, I also found out that Muscat, in terms of what you were explaining earlier, that, I know that my great-grandmother on my mother's side was Turkish, so fully Turkish from the Ottoman Empire, which eventually was ruling over that part of North Africa. But Muscat means, when translated in Turkish, means mother of soldiers. So I found that really, really interesting when I found out the region itself, the history behind it. So in the next slide, I think I kind of get into that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So je suis émazir means I am a free person. So the symbol that I was talking about earlier in the alphabet is called the wise or waz, which means free person or free people. And so the symbol for this group of people, which is the indigenous people, the Berber or the Mezin, which is the majority of North Africans. Yes, they have, I know you were talking about the genealogy, and there is a lot of diversity, but the majority in terms of, because there was so much activity with Europeans, so there was some European ancestry, but the majority of, at least the Maghreb, is also, they do have indigenous and blood in them.
Okay.
And I don't think that a lot of people, or a lot of North Africans in particular, understand the connection in the history. So if you could see that picture right there on the right, it's a picture of Algeria, like the flag, and then the actual like cutout of it. And on both sides, it is that was like symbol, which I thought it was really interesting, because when I would have conversations with my mom about like what it means or what, because like her grandmother had tattoos like that. That was a very common tattoo to have.
Okay.
Symbol, yeah, to put it right on your
Really
forehead.
cool.
Yeah, and you'll see I included a photo later on, but so yeah, it was very common. And I was asking her why, you know, her grandmother had the tattoos, and I've always had a very strong connection to tattoos, and I don't know why. And then going through this, I realized it was a big part of the
Yeah.
culture and the history of my people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Awesome.
right there you can see as well. I just want to give you kind of a perspective of what it looks like to be in Algeria. So you have Berber or Immigrant on top, the Tifnu, you have Arabic, and then some French. So the
Okay.
languages there is very, very complex, and there is even some Spanish, obviously, depending on where you are along the coast. But yeah.
Okay.
So we can go on to the next slide. Yeah, so if you could see that photo right there of the elderly woman, you can see sort of the symbols on her. It was very common also on the chin as well. And it was very common for older women. It was sort of a sign and a symbol of nobility. And every time there's like, depending on where you are in your life, these women would get either more tattoos or get tattoos to symbolize, like, let's say giving birth, for example, the fertility. Yeah, so the tattooing was very much a part of the culture, very much a part of the way of life, and also it was integral in terms of understanding each other in the tribe, because it was very hierarchical. So yeah. And I started digging into what it means to be Amazigh, and just, you know, the background of our people, because there's not a lot that ties us together, but aside from like the land itself and also the practices, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we're in the Saharan desert, and it's a very tough climate to exist in. And our people are like A1 at like living there and traveling and being able to build trains. So the Algerian people were able to build a full track all the way through the Saharan desert up into the northern part in the Mediterranean. So that just speaks to our ability to be in this terrain. Also, another reason why we were able to defeat France eventually, we had the advantage in terms of knowing the land. And so, yeah, and doing my digging and stuff, you see that symbol again, the Yez symbol. And this one, this one is the flag of the Shao, or the Shawiya tribe of Algeria. And so I didn't know anything about, you know, my tribe, or even like I started considering, even if you see my name, the way it's spelled, it's very different. Even because like it is an Arabic name, but the way it's spelled is like French almost. So there's layers to my name that I always felt and always seen, and you know, people always ask me like, are you just extra with the A? And I'm like, no, it's just a part of my name, and it's for a reason. It's because when you say in Arabic, it goes Chaimaa, and the Met in ancient times in North Africa, there was a goddess named Met, and she was, you know, the goddess of fertility, the goddess of justice, and you know, all these things that I think I've come to in a weird way come to like be. So yeah, it's very much part of my history. But when I started finding out, you know, especially the Shao people, aside from the spelling is very similar to my name, I forgot that I had listened, like I went to Algeria, I was listening to music, we would get, you know, songs and burned on CDs and everything from our cousins of just music that we really loved there, because Algeria has like Rai music and different, like the Arabian drums actually originate from North Africa. So we have a long history of sharing drums and music together. So if you could see that photo right in the middle, it's like a screenshot of my Spotify. So that was a song that I remember we would just jam out to at a wedding. And for some reason I liked it, and I had it saved, thank God, to my Spotify. And so I don't know why I didn't even read it, but it just one day it just hit me, and I saw Shao was right there. And I was like, I can understand exactly what they're saying.
Very cool.
Very cool, yeah. And that's when I started understanding, because the more I dig deep into Shao and the Shawians tribes, because there's obviously various tribes all over Algeria, and then Morocco and elsewhere, but these people were very, very mobile. And so their language resembles that in terms of being, including like some Spanish and including some, you know, what it's very layered. So that was the first clue that I got. And then once I saw this bread down here, I was like, that brought me back to my childhood, because I'm like, my mom has that exact like thing, that tool to make that bread. And I was like, oh my God, like this is my people.
What's it called?
I have no idea. We just call it bread, and I didn't know it was specific to us. So that was, you know, it was really cool to see that, and also be able to relate everything to even the physicality of my people, because the show people, because they travel so much and we're the most mobile in terms of the tribes, the North African tribes. It reflects in the skin tone, it reflects in the eyes and stuff of my people. So this image of the three little girls, you can see that, you know, they're fairer skin. Some of them have lighter eyes. And my sister off to my side here resembles that. She has, you know, green eyes and she's fairer skinned, and I'm, you know, more darker. And I thought that that was beautiful and very much like symbolic of my family, which we have very, very dark and very, very light, but also like green eyes runs through both sides of my family, which is different for a lot of Africans.
Sure. Yeah. Very cool.
Mm-hmm. So we can go on to the next one. And this is where everything just kind of got sealed for me in terms of what my people have been through, what they've been able to accomplish, and what they've held on to in terms of their capacity for revolution, for change, for intelligence, for so many things over time, not just in one period. They've been consistently, you know, going waves, but they've maintained a strong presence in terms of the global influence. So this image on your far left is Queen Kahina. And I had no idea this woman existed, but I knew that one of my mom's like good friends was named Kahina. And I thought that name was gorgeous. I've never heard it before. And I remember asking my mom, like she was also a beautiful woman, but I remember asking my mom, like, where is that name from? Like, I didn't know, I didn't think it was Arabic. And she goes, oh, it's the Kabili. Kabili is basically the other, it's like a Shawiyah Kabili. And then there's, oh, I totally forgot the last one, but basically they're the other immigrant tribe that's been very much resistant throughout the entirety of the French Revolution or the French colonization. And so Queen Kahina, who the statue exists right now in an eastern city, I forgot exactly where, but it's to symbolize her integrity and her ability to rile up not just women but men and become a military leader in the early, was it 7th century? It was the 7th century, and holding a resistance against the fronts that were collapsing, because North Africa, and specifically Algeria, was in tribes. They weren't exactly unified. She was called the queen because she was able to unify so many people as a resistance. And her story, you know, her legacy still lives on. And so the statue of her was really impactful to me, because I just felt like a leader, and I felt like a woman who could, you know, do incredible things, but I never understood why. And now I feel like I understand the legacy of my people is the legacy of the women as well, because in the Algerian Revolution, they held a huge part in being able to maneuver weapons, money, anything during the revolution, because the men weren't allowed, or soldiers weren't allowed to touch them. So they'd be veiled or whatever, and they would hide things. And so they were very much active in the resistance. And so to me, that was very inspiring to find out that there's, you know, there's still a legacy there, and they admire her. It's not like it was just of the past. They do respect, they do have this respect for women.
Very cool.
Yeah. And so here we have another revolutionary at the time of the French Algerian Revolution or war. Abdel Karim was noticed in the Time magazine. And so I don't know if you guys are familiar, but at the time they were torturing millions and millions of Algerians in terms of either like my father's side of the family, their villages were burned down. So we don't really have a history or, you know, we don't have any paper trail of where our family starts from. So that's why I kind of went and dig deep into just other ways of finding out. But yeah, so they were between the villages being burned down, the displacement of other people, there was torture happening at every corner. It was chaotic. And so he was one of the people that really held through even while being tortured. So I thought that was really amazing. And yeah, and so the next photo right here in the middle is just of three beautiful Berber women. And I think that one of the things that most attracted me, or most like just sat with me right in my heart and just really like mirrored me, was this like intense stare and this, you know, this almost
I could see that.
Yeah, and assurance of who they are, and I just love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they also have the tattoos too, but they're younger, so they don't have as many.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so Albert Camus, right there on the bottom, who's considered one of the best philosophers to exist, he was born in French Algeria, but I think a lot of his impact and influence definitely comes from the Algerian people. And right above it is Ahmed Ben Bella, who was the first president of Algeria, who was also a socialist and a revolutionist, or revolutionary, who was impactful in terms of the Pan-African, you know, revolution against colonialism. He was very much, I mean, you could see him next to JFK. And I think that was a really important time in history, not just for the US, but globally. And so to see my people being right there alongside, you know,
Sure.
yeah, such great
Yeah.
courage. It just reminded me of my legacies. So
For sure. Cool.
I think that's the last slide.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you sharing all that. And with, I have experienced something similar to what you've gone through, and a lot of people that I talk to and I work with, I kind of go through something. So let's talk about it, okay? Rather, I'm trying to, you know, think of this elegant way to say this. Let's just talk about it. One of the ways that a lot of people I work with that are NPEs that discover that they're not who they thought they were, and that's just the oversimplified term. And I mean, you can identify with this, right? So people suddenly get a DNA test, and the person they thought was their father is not their biological father. So half of who they thought they were is gone. Your situation is a little different, but it's very similar. It still causes an identity crisis. And one of the ways that I have worked through my identity crisis is I've delved into my genealogy, and I tell people that it's important. I tell them it's important that, and I won't give you the long version of this, but you hang around me enough, you'll hear me say this more than once, is that when we create our identity in the first place, we just believe things that we're told as we're growing up as children. And it can be as simple. The simple example as I use is that someone's a Cubs fan because their dad was a Cubs fan because their grandpa was a Cubs fan.
Yeah.
Right. And they're not a Cubs fan by birth. They've chosen that at some point. They may have chosen it when they were 4 because they admired their father wearing a Cubs hat and going to Cubs games with their dad, or whatever the case may be, but they've made that decision. And you can identify with that. Growing up, you adopted a lot of things, your identity, that were American, you know, and then you had the whole Algerian thing pulling on you. And so one of the things I say is that we really have, we have the ability, we do this all the time, that we actually decide who we are. And what MPEs, what we find ourselves with is that most people just believe that who you are is just who you are and you're born with that. Now, there's a little bit of truth to that, right? I'll never be Algerian.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, but if I wanted to move to Algeria and adopt and eat Algerian food and adopt their customs, I could blend in to a certain degree and basically almost become Algerian, which is my point here. And so I encourage people to dig through their ancestry, and I tell them, pick and choose who you want to be. Find the things that inspire you and adopt those into your life, which is exactly when you were talking through all those pictures and the statues and the women and the heroes and the politicians. It's exactly what you've done. You've let that light your fire and build your identity. You found people and places and people that inspire you, and you have said, I'm going to take that with me, and you slap that sticker on, and you go over here and you slap another one on until you basically design who you are. And with technology, it has become, not only can we really start digging back into especially European heritage, which is unfair, but
Yeah.
it is. But I have traced some of my ancestors all the way back to 950, and I'm very fortunate to do that. But technology gives us the ability to do that. It also gives us the ability to learn. I mean, most of the stuff you've learned, I know you've been to Algeria a lot, but a lot of you probably learned on the internet.
Absolutely.
Stuff you wouldn't have been exposed to.
Digging through articles and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is available to us, but I think that that's kind of where there is this difficulty in terms of information being distributed on the internet, because a lot of the stuff I had a degree that helped me know how to research and and be able to find exactly what I'm looking for. But two, also I have accessibility in terms of being able to read and understand what journals are talking about and what these findings are. So there is a little bit of, I would say, a privilege on my end in being able to do this. So
yeah, understood.
Yeah.
The cool thing is that in history, the victor writes the history, right? They write the history books. With the time we live in now, more and more like the stories coming out of Algeria, you'll be able to find them more and more on the internet. So, and 30 years ago, you had to probably go to Algeria to hear them, and now you don't have to. Now you just have to subscribe to the Bradley Hall Show.
You know everything.
That was shameless, wasn't it?
No,
that bad?
That's a great plug. No, but you're right. It is really exciting. And I think that's also why I do want to get my story out there, to inspire other people to do exactly what I did. And you don't have to be what people have told you. I think that comes, in the healing process. You definitely pick and choose, and you things will resonate with you that feel true.
Yeah. Now I want to ask you, I am mapping out, I call it my world tour. I'm mapping out my ancestry, and I'm going to go start visiting the motherland, the home countries. And you have experience with that. I have to believe there's nothing like it.
I think about, me and my sister talk about this all the time, that the times that we spent there were the happiest times of our childhood, and from what I remember, my parents, that was the happiest I've seen them. That was, it feels like this bliss almost. And I've been really missing it lately, especially with everything that's been going on. So if you can go, definitely go. And it feels, there's a part of you that just it's like home. And I think for us, who've experienced so much trauma or have been in one way or another abandoned, it's almost necessary for you to develop and find that for yourself. Because you can look at I love the song, DNA by Kendrick, sex, money, murder is in all of our DNA. So we can go through the list and pick and choose, if we want to be a certain person. There's definitely that person in your history, your ancestry, but there's a lot of also really interesting things when you dig deeper beyond just the DNA stuff.
Yeah. And as we start to wrap this up, I appreciate you going through all that. You have the distinction of being the first person to bring a PowerPoint onto my show.
I don't know if I'm happy about that.
I waited intentionally to tell you that till it was over. But I looked at it and I was fascinated by it. And I think it's critical because I want people to understand you have a lot of trauma in your background, and I thought we'd go into that more than we did, but I enjoyed what we did, so that's not a problem. But I want to highlight you're a trauma recovery coach with the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaches because of your childhood trauma that you experienced. You've been trying to work through, and this experience, connecting with your ancestry, has been incredibly cathartic and therapeutic for you. Yes.
1,000%. It feels, like I said, like a homecoming, because I don't know about you guys, but for me, the biggest feeling I've always had was not feeling like I belonged anywhere. And so belonging.
I know a lot of people that know that feeling.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I think I want to put this out there for others to feel what I feel in terms of this return. And it's really interesting because you do see parts of yourself that go just beyond parents or not parents, you know. It is like a community. So
yeah,
that I wish you guys so much luck in your healing journeys, and I hope that you tap into that a little bit.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, we're going to wrap this up, but you're going to stick around, right? We've got a Q&A session with my people from the NPE experience are going to hang around. They're going to ask you a few questions. For everyone else, we appreciate you joining us live on Facebook and on WUBI radio. We appreciate you. Look for us in 2 weeks. We'll be back again at 7:30 p.m. with another The Bradley Hall Show live. And I do believe my next guest is going to be Libby Copeland. She's the author of The Lost Family and an NPE expert. She's an award-winning journalist. So we're really looking forward to that. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you in 2 weeks. And everyone else, stay right here with me for a moment.